Welcome to $100 Plus Mileage, your podcast to learn about New Hampshire bills that don't quite make the headlines, but still might impact you. So far this year, we've talked about treasure hunting on school grounds, ticket fraud at local playhouses, and even child support for unborn children. Today, we're headed to college, and a bit of a serious topic. Sadly, I will not have as many opportunities today to make jokes. By the way, I'm Anna Brown from Citizens Count.
And I'm Mike Dunbar, also from Citizens Count. Many of the debates around campus sexual assault in New Hampshire have focused on protecting victims and punishing perpetrators, but Representative Bob Lynn sees the issue through a different lens. He's concerned about the rights of the accused. Now the New Hampshire House of Representatives is debating a bill that would require detailed due process rights for students, faculty, and student organizations accused of misconduct at public colleges and universities. Okay, Anna, what's the history here?
Most of the people listening to this podcast have probably heard some stories about sexual assault on college campuses. It's been a big issue for well over a decade. One story I remember clearly is the student at Columbia University who carried around a dormitory mattress everywhere she went as a form of performance art, protest, and senior project about how Columbia handled her report of sexual assault. There are a lot of twists and turns to that story, and I don't want to dive into that here because this is a podcast about New Hampshire.
Yeah, of course. Let's talk about New Hampshire.
In 2020, Governor Sununu signed a bill aimed at fighting sexual assault on college campuses. Students and advocates praised the new policy and reporting requirements, but the issue of campus sexual assault was hardly eliminated. Just a year later, students protested outside the home of UNH President James Dean over the university's response to a sexual assault on campus. Students wanted to know what the university was doing to protect them from an alleged rapist. University officials stressed the importance of protecting the identity of both victim and perpetrator until they completed their investigation and disciplinary process. This 2021 incident is probably the most well-known clash between the rights of accused and accuser on a college campus in New Hampshire. Representative Lynn, the prime sponsor of this year's bill on campus due process, doesn't have any specific stories or examples of New Hampshire colleges violating students' due process rights. However, he speculates that if a student was disciplined for an alleged sexual assault or other offense, they might not want to draw attention to that finding, even if they believe the process was unjust.
Right, and we've got a quote here from Representative Lynn at a committee work session. He said, even though this is, an education proceeding as opposed to like a criminal trial or even a civil lawsuit, the consequences of that can be really significant. I mean, somebody, particularly take the example of sexual assault, somebody is accused of having sexually assaulted somebody, and let's assume it doesn't go to a criminal case or a civil case, but there's been a finding made that that happened. That could have a very, very significant consequence to somebody's life later on. So, what's in the bill, Anna?
HB 1288, Representative Lynn's bill, would apply when a student or faculty member faces suspension, expulsion, or termination. The law would also apply when a student organization is at risk of losing privileges on campus. The law would give about a dozen rights to the individual or organization facing discipline, including a right to a hearing with an impartial officer or panel, copies of evidence at least 5 days before the hearing, the right to cross-examine witnesses, and so on. If there's an imminent threat of physical injury or property damage, the college or university could take some emergency actions before the hearing. However, if there were criminal charges or a protective order, the college or university would not be allowed to move forward with disciplinary proceedings until the criminal process is finished.
I understand that the university and community college systems currently provide students with varying due process rights depending on the severity of the offense. The most serious cases, those which could result in a suspension or removal from school, go through a formal hearing process similar to what is outlined in HB 1288.
Correct. And there were about 80 of those cases in the state university system last year. However, the due process requirements in HB 1288 are more robust than what UNH and the community college system currently require. So the university system estimated it would cost at least $500,000 more a year to hire and train staff to implement HB 1288. The community college system estimated costs around $380,000 per year.
Wow, and does the bill pay for that?
Not exactly. No, the bill doesn't go into effect until the next budget cycle, so lawmakers say they would take it into account the next time they allocate money for colleges and universities.
Okay, so kind of like an informal IOU.
Yeah, and we could get into a whole other conversation about budgeting and funding for public college, but good Lord, we do not have time for that here. Back to HB 1288. Representatives from the university and community college systems are also concerned that the bill may conflict with federal law, particularly Title IX.
Oh, okay. So that's the law that protects students from sex discrimination.
Correct. The Biden administration released guidance on Title IX that requires colleges and universities to act quickly on allegations of sexual assault and harassment. However, HB 1288 would require campus officials to hold off on final disciplinary actions until any criminal process is complete. That can take years. So that seems to conflict with the guidance on Title IX to act quickly, opening state universities and colleges to lawsuits and potentially a loss of federal funding.
But the bill said a college could take some action before a hearing if there's a threat to public safety, right?
Yes, HB 1288 does allow some temporary emergency actions for serious cases such as rape. But some federal courts have ruled that interim actions, such as a temporary suspension pending a years long criminal investigation, are not allowed. Representatives from the university system brought that up in the public hearing and basically said the bill would put them in between a rock and a hard place legally.
Okay, we haven't talked about faculty contracts yet. How do those come into play?
Yes, the university and community college systems also have collective bargaining agreements with faculty that govern discipline. The requirements in those agreements are likely to duplicate and or conflict with the processes laid out in HB 1288. I suppose in theory though that could be renegotiated. I am not a contract expert. I think the moral of the story here is that HB 1288 would have a lot of legal implications that might make the bill more complex than it appears on the surface.
They always are. It seems like a lot of the conversation is focused on the sexual assault piece, though.
Yes, and that was my impression tuning into bill hearings for sure. In fact, there's one final sticking point that really seems to get at the heart of the tension between the right of the victim and the right of the accused: cross examination. HB 1288 includes this right.
Okay, so Representative Mike Belcher from Wakefield highlighted that in his committee report as particularly important. He wrote, quote, in testimony, it was suggested by college representatives cross-examination is prohibited in some cases despite it being a fundamental practice of due process as enshrined in the Bill of Rights and dating to time immemorial to be found even in Proverbs 18:17. There is a broad perception that the university environment is unfriendly to certain accused. This bill seeks to correct that. Close quote.
But what seems like a highlight to Representative Belcher is horrible to some bill opponents. They argue that allowing an alleged rapist to cross examine their accuser is unfair and potentially traumatizing for sexual assault survivors. Representative Linda Tanner wrote a conflicting committee report that said provisions in this bill, such as allowing cross examination by the accused in an open meeting without the guardrails afforded in an official court trial, may cause life threatening trauma to the victim and cause more victims to not seek help or report assaults.
Sure, no easy answers here. So, where does HB 1288 stand?
The House passed HB 1288 on February 22nd, then sent the bill to the Finance Committee to review its potential impact on the budget. The House Finance Committee recently voted 13 to 12 in favor of the bill. The bill will get a second vote in the full House April 11th, and I think this will be a really close one, probably depending on attendance that day.
Okay, well, you know the drill, folks. If you have an opinion on HB 1288, reach out to your state representative. You can find out who represents you at citizenscount.org/elected-officials. And if you want tips on what to say and how to reach out, you can check out our advocacy toolkit at citizenscount.org/how-2/advocate. Next up, our closing segment, Only in New Hampshire. Anna, what do you have for us today?
Today, we're talking about crime and due process. So let's go back to June 1895 and the Great State House Heist. I might be overselling it a bit, but here's the article from Foster's Daily Democrat. Shout out to Foster's Daily Democrat. The treasurer and his assistant were at dinner at the time of the robbery, and the three watchmen were all temporarily absent from the building. The door of the Treasury office is protected by an old lock, probably made 50 years or more ago, which it is claimed could be opened a few minutes by prying with a nail. The key of the vault which contained the safe was hanging in a convenient place, and it would seem that the robbers had little trouble in accomplishing their work. The safe has one of the improved combination locks, but it is not kept locked in the daytime. Pause. Great, great, really just I love all of the
Yeah, why would you
security
keep the
measures
vault
so
locked?
far, like not locking the safe, key at a convenient place, 50-year-old lock with a nail. Okay, continuing this article. It is evident that the burglars, having provided themselves with a nail, waited until the treasurer and watchman had left the building, and then opened the various unprotected doors, took all there was, and left on an early train. So much time was spent in searching for the missing keys and in picking the locks, which the thieves had sprung before leaving, that the robbers had about 2 days' start before the case was placed in the hands of the police, and the chances of catching them are generally considered very remote. The treasurer says that the state will not be embarrassed. Little late for that, buddy. Little late. To continue, State Treasurer Carter says that after a thorough examination of the vaults, $5,429.66 is known to be missing. Of this, $2,044.16 is a certificate of deposit payable to the order of the treasurer, of which payment has been stopped. This reduces the apparent net loss to $3,385.50. I did some quick internet inflation math, and that means the robbers ended up with about $125,000 in today's dollars. So, Mike, I don't know if you're a true crime fan like me, but what do you make of all this?
Well, I mean, obviously, this was unavoidable. I mean, if you protected it that well that, they would have had to have found a nail to open. I mean, you can't solve things like this. Also, the real question is, was this an inside job or was this an inside job? That's
I mean,
my
it was
conspiracy
all
theory.
3 guards were gone, and then the treasurer and his assistant were out to lunch.
It's awfully convenient.
Also, why don't you lock the safe when you're out to lunch? Like, I get, like, maybe during the day you're in the office and it's like you just want to, I don't know, back in 1895, maybe you're constantly handling cash in and out. But, like, you could have locked the safe when you went to lunch. Oh, and then my other favorite part is how it took 2 days for them to get the police involved, which to me is either they were, like, just embarrassed and trying to figure it out on their own. But I also wonder
But they weren't embarrassed. They said they weren't embarrassed.
True. So I think maybe they just couldn't find the key and couldn't lock the safe, and they were like, "This, we'll find it eventually. It's fine."
They couldn't find a nail.
Couldn't find a nail. Did it?
All
just
right. Well,
like, yeah.
That wraps it up for this episode of $100 plus mileage, but you can find more information and episodes at citizenscount.org. This podcast is made possible by a generous grant from Northeast Delta Dental. We'd also like to thank Franklin Pierce University for producing and the Granite State News Collaborative for hosting. Our theme music is composed by me, Mike Dunbar. And lastly, we thank you for giving us a listen and thinking about how you can be part of what makes New Hampshire by the people, for the people.